Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining in today. This is Adrienne Lloyd. I'm here with the Women in Healthcare podcast for MGMA, and it's my honor to have Doral Jacobsen with us today. She has been in healthcare for a little over 20 years with a large focus in payer contracting. She is one of the fellow MGMA consultants with me, but I've known her. She lives in Asheville, North Carolina, so we're just a few hours apart, but we've been fortunate to know each other, I guess, 4 or 5 years now. She is a fantastic speaker as well. If you ever get to see her at a conference, please make sure you get to see her sessions, and just has a lot of insights. And I know she and I were talking just before this too. There's obviously a lot of experiences we've had similar throughout our careers, but also in life. So we may kind of see where the journey takes us today. But Doral, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. And I'd love to let you say hello and introduce yourself a little bit too, if you want to add anything.
Sure. Thanks, Adrienne. So good to see you as always, and really fun to be on this podcast. I'm super excited about women in healthcare. I think it's really cool to kind of showcase some of the different things that our colleagues are doing, and really happy to be with you today. Just a little bit about me. I've been in healthcare for quite a while, working in the payer contracting space, and I hope to share a little bit about my journey and give you some tidbits about how to be successful in contracting, and then also kind of backing up into a little bit of the things that we're doing at Prosper Beyond and with our payer contracting clients that are helpful from an industry perspective as well.
Sounds great. Sounds great. I'd love to just start off. What are some recent trends or developments that you're seeing that are influencing payer negotiations for medical practices and systems?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. So, some of the things that are very impactful, I think number one, of course, it's January 2024. So, cuts in Medicare. So, what are we going to do? We're going to make it up on the commercial side. So, the phone is ringing because this is how the pressure works, right? So the Medicare fee schedule cuts are super impactful and are really driving the need for practices to talk to their payer partners about getting increases, because as medical CPI increases, cost to provide care increases, the money has to come from somewhere. Another thing from a trend perspective that's having catching a really we're working on a lot with our payer contracting clients is administrative burden. And so, for example, I have a GI client right now, and in this particular state, we have a flurry of Medicare Advantage plans popping up all over the place. And this practice is a really big practice in this geography, very sought after. And basically, they've said if they require prior auths, we don't even want to talk to them. So we had 5 different payers. I think we're talking to 3 now. And one of them is thinking about taking that off the table because it costs practices money.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
yeah, I think the administrative burden is another big thing. Also, COVID, kind of the ramifications of the pandemic.
Yeah.
We have lots of things that are influencing us. There are new protocols that we have in place, so our cost of care has increased. There are lots of things that we need to be cognizant of in terms of how we manage those populations, reimbursements for vaccines. All of that is really, really important and impactful. And the last thing that I think is just really emerging, or has been for the past several years, are innovative models. So I'll give you an example. I was working with a practice, and I say this in my talks all the time, but every negotiation starts with no. That's how they train us on the payer side. No, no, no.
Yeah.
Starts with no. And so thinking about it from a more innovative way, what we do in payer contracting work is we want to partner with payers. So we all want the same things. So how do we partner? And some of that could be innovative models. So for example, this negotiation started out with a no. We got on the phone with the VP and talked about how can we collaborate, help you with your HEDIS measures, help this practice remain independent. We've come up with some quality measures that we're going to add to the contract, so it's helpful to everyone. So I think that's another driver from a trend perspective.
I love that. Yeah, prior auths. I mean, even when I was in gastroenterology, I'm going to age myself, but back in the mid 2000s, I mean, it was such a huge issue for that, and it's so many procedural surgical specialties as well. And ultimately, we're not we're not doing care that's not warranted. So being able to have that streamlined is so important, and often it results in delays that are just unnecessary. So that is fantastic. Is there anything that I heard your presentation at the MGMA national meeting last year on negotiation, and I know you had kind of brought your team in, and you guys had met with kind of learned from Chris Voss. Are there any kind of tactics or successful negotiation strategies that you can share from that
Oh
experience?
yeah, absolutely. So one of the things, I mean, we do so many things that fall in line with the whole never split the difference
Mm,
thought process. But some of the tactics that we use routinely are, it's called, he calls it tactical empathy, and it's really listening to what is happening on the other side and aligning with it, because in contrast to a lot of our peer groups, we don't come out with guns blazing. We are really very collaborative in our approach.
right.
Most of us are from the payer side of Prosper Beyond, so we understand what it's like to sit in that seat. So aligning with the payer and trying to be a problem solver is where we come from. And by being empathetic to the payer, we create connectivity, which is probably one of the reasons why we're so successful with our clients, is that that connectivity helps us as a catalyst launch into all kinds of things like discussions about innovative models, um, different scenarios that we might try out over time to solve problems for a practice. But so that's one, the empathy part. Another thing that I would say we use quite often is mirroring.
Mm,
So when we're trying to get information from a payer, we always start our conversations with asking the payer a little bit about what's happening in their world, how long they've been there, what have been their roles,
yeah.
because folks like to talk about themselves. And also, it's like a launching pad for finding out about new products, new initiatives. So we use mirroring a lot as well. So we can better understand what's going on at the payer so that we can help the payer understand what the value is that the practice brings that is helpful in terms of what their initiatives are. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, so many. We love Chris Voss, and we use a lot of those strategies.
Yeah, and for those of you who don't know Chris Voss, the Never Split the Difference book, but he was an FBI hostage negotiator, right? So it's yeah, I loved it. You did a fantastic job and at the meeting, so that was definitely engaging
Thanks.
conversation. It's really great to just think about the other side and how to really better interact with them. Um, is there any advice that you would give for healthcare leaders looking to strengthen their negotiation skills as they're kind of moving through these strategies or?
Yes, yes, absolutely. So, of course, what I was just talking about, like,
Yeah.
be the 180. Don't be the person that emails the payer and says, we need a 50% increase tomorrow.
Mhm.
Really get in there, listen, be collaborative, make it easy for the payer to understand the value that your practice brings to the organization and quantify it. Every practice I talk to is a high quality practice, but what do the numbers show and how does that compare to benchmarks?
Right.
So, looking at that information is going to help you position in a negotiation, um, and quite simply prioritizing it, because when the phone rings at Prosper Beyond, it's because it's fallen off the radar. It's not in the strategic plan for the practice, and it's no one's responsibility squarely. So
Sure.
just prioritizing it and putting it in the strategic plan and then rolling it out as a long term objective that's ongoing is going to help you make sure that you ask for those increases when you need to. A lot of these contracts have renewal windows, and if you miss them, you're in that contract for another year. So it's really important to get ahead of it. So prioritization, thinking about yourself as a partner, education. Anytime that you can listen to folks that have experience doing this. I mean, even if you just pick up one or two pieces of information, it's helpful. Establishing goals. I think that's another piece that's really key, is setting off in the distance. This is where you want to be.
Right.
Financial goals, of course, but then also, are there innovative models that you're interested in? What does that look like?
Yeah.
How do you prepare for those innovative models? And how do you talk to your payer partners about launching a potential pilot? So thinking about those things in that way. a steering process. I find that practices, even if they start down this path, if they don't have a steering process thinking about the long term and short term goals, we can get off track. So we really need to kind of create a container of here's what our short term goals are,
Right.
here's what our long term goals are, and then holding up any initiatives to that lens. Does this fall in? Like, do we want more Medicaid members? Maybe we do, maybe we want. Do we know what we want to do in terms of percentage of payer mix with workers' compensation? So we're not just reacting, we're really responding from a strategic perspective.
Absolutely.
Getting good advisors. Here's the other pieces. If you don't have time to do it, I mean, it is the return on investment is amazing. So it is something that can be easily outsourced as well. So don't be afraid to think about that.
Is there a timeline when people are, and I agree, I think a lot of times, and as healthcare leaders, we're kind of running around, we're putting out fires, and it's hard to, to find the time, or, it's something we have to make the time for, to kind of take a step back. And, whether it's big things like, capital, growth strategy, or it's, payer contracting, to really make that, like, these are things that how frequently do you feel like people should look at this? And then what is a reasonable timeline for them to say, like, if we want changes, our contracts are coming up due in 24 months, 12 months, like, what is a reasonable time frame for people to kind of put a date and, okay, we want it done by this, so we need to start, at what point
Yes,
before then?
that's a great question. So, a lot of our clients, I think the first piece is to understand, to get it on the calendar at all. The timeline for negotiations, typically when you start a negotiation to the time it's concluded, if there's a new contract, could be anywhere from 6 months to a year. So
Yeah,
you have to think about it with that long-term lens because it certainly does take a lot of time. Um, so backing up and starting everything, it's first prioritizing who you want to talk to, negotiating those contracts, and then I recommend once you conclude a negotiation, you need to identify the next time you should start it. So for example, if it takes you 12 months to negotiate a contract with United Healthcare, then you should be starting to allow yourself enough time to do that successfully based on history.
right.
So that's what we look at is how long did it take us? And then as far as frequency, I mean, sometimes we have clients that are going back every year with certain
Okay.
payers, others every 2 years. So yeah, but what we do see is that payers have a budget
Yeah,
line item for increases. And so what we always tell our clients is that we want to get you in that budget. We want you to be in that budget. So they will expect that phone call.
right.
Yeah.
No,
Great
that's
question.
Yeah, and I think, even before that, if you've got a 12-month window, really starting to understand, as you said, the key areas that are important to you, either based on, this a certain type of patient category, how you're doing, it's a surgery, these patients that you're caring for, they're ones that are more valuable to you because that's where you want to focus in the practice, or those ones that you kind of push more heavily on versus other ones that it would be nice to kind of the nice to haves, get increases in some of those areas, but are not going to really be as impactful, or things that you could bundle into more of a clinical care model. I think those are great to really start having those discussions and having them with their providers too. It's like I always say a lot of times it's trying to think ahead of what do we want to create, what do we want to create, and who are we trying to
Yes.
care for? Where do we want to focus as a practice, as a team, and then letting it flow from there.
Yeah. And one more thing that's worth noting is contracts that are disadvantageous and are too low, those are not to be ignored
Yeah,
because they can be very harmful and really ruin your leverage. So if you've got a contract and you go to a payer and you're not able to get it up to market rates, that might be one to exit. So
right,
just as important, really, because it will, from a,
right,
again, long-term strategy, it's going to help you position to continue to care for your community.
right. And I've been part of organizations that we've done that and worked with groups that have done that too. And of course, that comes with its own process of before you make those decisions, understanding what is that patient population in those contracts, who might transition to another one? Are there, other care opportunities, community, and just really understanding that too. So it's a lot of moving pieces. And I
Yes.
agree. It is great to have partners that, at least the first time or two that you go through that to really help you think of those things. So, but thank you so much for sharing tips on that, with the group. I think that's fantastic. Um, is there anything that, um, you would say that I don't know, is there any technologies that you've seen that are coming to help, on the negotiation side or just better understanding the data? I know there's a lot of AI and other kind of tools, and I know even historically working with electronic health records and, RCM systems, getting the data out sometimes has just been so onerous. So is there anything that you're seeing or anything that you could envision developing maybe?
Well, we actually work with AI quite a bit.
Awesome.
It is very helpful in so many ways, as our interns are always showing us, and that is doing things like crafting correspondence, doing some research for us to help us understand what's happening from a market perspective in a given geography. There is some transparency data that's out there, but it's really kind of hit or miss. Yeah, so there's some of that, but really from a technology perspective, I would say AI is something to be looking at as another hand to help you move a little quicker. Yeah, and sometimes you have to be, there's art to using AI, and that's when we really leverage folks that are using it every day to help us there. But yeah, that's a great question.
Okay, I know you mentioned your internship program, and I know you've been doing this now for several years. Tell us a little bit about that. I know you've got real passion for
Yeah.
helping develop others in the field and
Yeah, thanks. We take summer interns, and we have usually two or three. And what we're really doing is having them shadow analytics and then also consulting, so that they see what it's like to be a consultant working in a remote environment,
wow.
working with payers. But when we back it up, it's really a 12-week program, and we are also helping them understand how to take care of yourself from a professional perspective. So, for example, one of the things that we do first is talk about self-care routine.
Yeah,
How do you create enough space so that you get enough rest, so that you are focused, so that you have enough downtime? Because as folks launch off into their professional careers,
yeah,
those things can get lost. And so at Prosper Beyond, we want to help them prepare not only from a technical perspective in terms of how does contract negotiation work, and what are the components of those processes, but also how do you step back and make sure that you're living a life you want to live from a
yeah.
professional perspective and take really good care of yourself. So we love our interns. They Last year our interns ended up giving a talk at the North Carolina MGMA
Oh,
on
fantastic.
AI, which
Yeah,
was fantastic. And so we learned from them so much. And anyway, we view it like this: like, what are the things that we wish someone would have told us
right.
back at the beginning of
Yeah,
our career? And then as all of us at Prosper Beyond, have weighed in on, here are some things they should read. For example, we have a square breathing exercise that we give to them, or if you're anxious or you need to calm down. We've got a couple of TED Talks on how to have great conversations, for example. We have a whole reading list for them. So it's more about how to create kind of a growth mindset,
love it.
in terms of how you show up in the world as a professional. So yeah, that's
Love
a
that.
little bit about our internship program.
Yeah, I couldn't help but notice all your books behind you. So anyone that you comes to mind that you would recommend for
I just read one called "I Love It Here,"
Mm,
and it
that
is all about the undercover millennial,
yeah.
which is, yeah, that's right there. Yeah, I love it here. Um, is that Clint Pulver? So it's about a company that is undercover millennial, and it's all about how to create spaces in organizations that are make people want to stay. And
Yeah,
so, that's something, as a CEO of an organization, I'm always trying to look at is, how can I create an environment where it's supportive, it's fun, there are rewards that make a lot of sense, and we kind of weather things together and support each other, really in living our best professional life. So there's some really good information in there about how different CEOs manage
yeah.
their businesses, and I take a lot away from that. So yeah, that's one I recently read that I really dig.
I love it. Yeah, I always try to when I'm working with, groups, whether it's as a team or individual clients, it really is like, what do you want to create for your organization? But like, really, what do you want for yourself as well, like as a career, but also for your personal, life. I think there's so much along the way that can get lost. Has there been kind of lessons that you've had throughout your your journey as things, we know I always say like life is a roller coaster. I think anything that we're entrepreneurship for me, definitely been a roller coaster. I think leadership was too, being a mom, all the things. But is there anything that you would kind of share with your younger self or lesson that you've had along the way that you?
That's a great question. So definitely the life roller coaster it is very resonant for me. When I started Prosper Beyond, it was in the midst of losing a job. I had some significant personal challenges, moving through a divorce, two kids in tow. I mean, all the things.
Yeah.
And it was really kind of born out of really a really tough time in my life. Launching this company was happening at the same time. So it was some of the lessons I learned along the way. Boy, so many of them, but I think one of them was getting some assistance.
Yeah.
So I ended up developing this kind of circle of advisors, folks that were really important in my professional development and who really helped me understand things that were possible from a structure perspective that were really quite innovative.
Yeah.
And that was really, really important to ask for help and to get it exactly where I needed. So that's definitely something that I had to learn along the way. Um,
Yeah, I think.
Another thing, and it's I'm sorry, you're going to go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna add to that. I think, I too, I left kind of large, corporate life and actually was, kind of mid COVID, definitely, at the end of 2020. And, I often will say as a leader, and you may have felt this too, as a leader kind of in a big system, there are moments where we still feel alone because we feel like we're carrying, not necessarily secrets, but sometimes, things that are coming that we don't want to kind of give to our team. And then there's things that we're trying to figure out before we talk to upper leadership about because we want to make sure we've maybe got some of the answers. And so I think it's easy in those in those formal roles to feel alone. But I don't know if you felt this way too, but kind of leaving a larger system where there were lots of people around, there's teams that you're working with to shifting into your own business. I mean, that was a bigger transition for me than I expected. It was helpful for me to be connected and MGMA, several other associations to meet people like you. But what was that transition like for you? It struck me that I can imagine people even kind of moving into retirement, phases or these job transitions a lot of people are going through right now. I think that is a huge part of the shift that we don't talk about, that you really go from team to
Yeah,
single, individual, and especially if
right.
it's coupled with personal changes, which I think both of us experience.
Totally.
So, yeah.
Yeah. That is so, so true. That was really a big culture shock, coming from giant organization, so many large teams that I was participating on, to really everything just got kind of quiet. So what was difficult was filling my social cup, because
Yeah.
my social cup got filled in the corporate environment a lot easier. But it also gave me the permission to launch a new way to fill that social cup. And so it honestly, it's a lot healthier now than it was even in those structures, but it was definitely lonely.
Yeah.
And so I had to seek out, new circles. Like Million Cups of Coffee is something that I would attend, which is an innovation hub here in Asheville. But there are you can really lean into lots of different circles to fill that. The other piece that was really tough was the lack of structure.
Yeah.
I had a
Yeah.
lot of structure in corporate America, and now it was up to me to
Right.
define what that structure was going to look like. So that was really kind of a culture shock as well. But it can be a little scary, definitely, and it can be lonely. And so for me, what has been, it's really given me license to kind of launch. It's like a blank canvas. Like, what do I want it to look like? How
Yeah.
do I want to spend my time? And who do I want to spend my time with? Because when I look back on my experience in corporate life, I was actually in a lot of spaces spending time with individuals and with teams that were, they were not adding any value to my life,
Yeah.
even not even to, not adding a lot of value, period, I would say. And so now I am so protective of my time. It's got to make sense, and it's got to make sense for my team. And so boy, so many lessons from moving from a bigger environment to a smaller environment. And then the other piece is I got to define how much time I spend on keep self-care.
Yeah.
So, and this is something that I do, and it works really well for me. Is my calendar really wasn't my own in corporate America, right? It really belonged to
Yes.
the firms that I was with. That's just how it went. My calendar's my own now. So I've got this whole color coding system thing. Everybody has access to my calendar. And if I've got green and it's an hour and a half, I'll say I'm on a run.
Yeah.
Or I'm taking off this afternoon because I'm going to go have lunch with my daughter
Yeah.
and we're going to go shopping. Or a pink is joy. So
Yeah.
I have to build things in my life that have no connection to work, no connection to family. They're just things that bring me joy and they're not productive. Because that's one of the things that I really had to lean into when I was an entrepreneur. Every single moment had to be achieving something. But today, I really value doing things that are have no other meaning. Like this weekend, it was really cold and yucky, so we worked on some watercolor stuff. So there are things that I do in my life now that in corporate America probably wouldn't have that stuff wouldn't fly.
Right, but
But
I think it's a shift of it is still being productive and that it's allowing you to be your best version, whatever that is. And I think that's, both my parents were teachers, definitely growing up was very like high achiever. What are you going to get done? And they were great, but also like I know early on in my jobs and even, all of them too, it was very much like, what are you producing? And I think, definitely the structure, I miss that some days because you kind of look left, look right, and you're like, okay, it's just me. But really trying to understand like where do you best serve, really focusing on your strengths. And these are things I know you probably work with, clients and have these conversations too. And as I do of, even if you are still in a system, in a, practice in those formal leadership roles, it's really important to take the time to build out whether it's time to focus on pair contracting or strategy or have those moments that are really, figuring out what's really important to you and trying to create that. And every week's not going to work. It's not going to look the way that you would ideally love it to, perhaps as it might
right.
as if you maybe have more of your own business. But really trying to be mindful of that. Is there a process that you go through? Do you look at things like monthly, weekly? Like how do
Yeah,
you
yeah, I do.
establish
There's
that?
kind of a pie chart in my mind. This is how much time I want to spend working. This is how much time I want to spend exercising.
Yeah.
This is how much time I want to spend with family. And I look to see, am I spending time where I want to? And where do I need to adjust? And here's the really cool thing. It gives everyone else at Prosper Beyond in my company permission to do the same.
Okay. And to
Yeah.
ask
So
questions
it's
and to
funny. I
say
have
like,
a
"I want to do this." Yeah, to
yeah.
have
And I have lots of people on the team who have come from big corporate jobs, and it's really hard to slow down.
Mhm.
And I think that it's a lovely thing that we can do for each other is to support each other in living a life that doesn't exhaust you and can be fulfilling and rewarding in
Yeah.
different ways. And I think that's kind of a cultural shift. Instead of the I can remember, being on vacation and getting calls from
Oh,
folks at
absolutely.
work, and I mean, I'll take full responsibility for that. I would answer the phone.
Yeah.
Um, that doesn't happen anymore in my life. There's
Yeah.
unless something's on fire, and it's a nice way to be in the world, and it's a nice
Yeah.
way to respect downtime. And I'm just so happy that I get to do that.
Yeah, I used to always feel like if I wanted something to like break or, I just go on vacation, like never failed, everything was going fine. And then all of a sudden you go on vacation, you're like, okay, why did I leave? I actually had my boss one time tell me he went on vacation and he said, don't burn the place down. And then we had a flood. So, I was like, well, you should have been more specific. Like you should have
Right.
covered all the natural disasters. But one of the things I love about what you said is, I think sometimes I definitely felt like slowing down means being less productive or creating less of an impact or less results. And I don't believe that's true. And I know that I think you kind of feel the same way as like it's being more mindful about where we're spending our time and energy and what's really going to move the needle for that client, for the practice, business as a whole. How does that feel for you as you kind of like frame what we've historically thought of as busy is productive?
Yeah. So that's what I see is that the better my self care routine, the better it is for everybody, my clients, my team members, my children, all of the folks that are in my life. So it all starts with me. When I take good care of myself, everybody wins. And I see that happen time and time again. So it's proportional. And I can also see what happens when that doesn't go so well. If I'm exhausted, I had a couple weeks ago where I was travel. And even looking at that week, I was like, oh, it's going to be rough. And it was rough. So what does that do for me? I'm not going to be able to show up as my best self. I
Right.
won't be as rested.
Yeah.
I won't be able to exercise like I normally would, and I'm just not going to feel my best. So it is just appreciating that I'm sensitive to that, and I need to put those things in place so that I don't get to a spot where I'm not doing my best, because my clients deserve me at my best, and that's what I want to give. So it's almost like I have to take care of myself,
Yeah.
or I'm not going to be able to do the awesome work that we do at Prosper Beyond to take good care of our clients. Furthermore, everybody on the team needs to do the same.
Yeah.
So, and that kind of leads me to this. You were asking about what would I tell my younger self? Three things I noted. One I've already talked about: self-care, self-care, self-care. Prioritizing that really helps me be the best version of myself, which helps everybody. Um, the other pieces, and I like to think about things in this way: making my 5-year-old self and my 85-year-old self proud. When I'm facing any tough decision, I think about those two individuals, and I know in my body what to do always. And then the last one is boundaries. And I know we've talked about this many times, but I feel like when I was younger in my career, I said yes to way too much.
I understand.
And as a result, it led me into exhaustion, unhappiness, and not living the life I wanted to live. So, what I would tell my younger self is, having boundaries is fantastic. Saying no to things is absolutely okay. Figure out how to do that, because, in fact, what it does is it helps you focus on the things you should focus on. Like, for example, we had a client once that just was not a good fit for us. And so we ended up parting ways with that client. And it was a great boundary, because what I think is, okay, who's going to arrive? Who's the next one that's going to arrive, that's going to be better aligned with how we work and what we do? And then it's like we stop fitting a square peg in a round hole. But I'll say boundaries are beautiful. And I wish my younger self had a beat on that, because I spent a lot of time saying yes to a lot of things that I shouldn't have.
Yeah, and I think the more too I've found even over the last, I'd say 3, 5 years has been the more I can recognize like what comes easier for me to do. Certain types of activities just tend to flow more versus other ones I can do, but I have to like be more focused or I need more energy or I just got to be at like my absolute best and starting to recognize and saying, you know what, maybe I'm not in the best place to have this conversation or to do this work. Sometimes, yes, you've got to move through and get it done because there's some deadline. But if you can pay attention and start to recognize like these are the areas that really feel and you try to do more of those, right? Like those things where you really feel like you're in your, I hate to say genius zone and maybe overused, but like you're in, your best self and it's really you're creating the impact and it's doing it in a way that feels easy. We both were talking a little bit earlier too about, feeling like maybe this is we're all entering a little bit softer era where we don't have to be kind of carrying it all and being all and we get to kind of have that vulnerability and transparency with our teams, with our clients, that openness, and with ourselves too, that grace of, we don't have to do it all today. We don't have to, but we can kind of move through it all at the time that we need to. So
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And there are there's this thought process, and I see this a lot with team members that have come from some bigger environments. Like, there's always this sense of urgency, like it has to be done right now, and it likely does not. So it's just acknowledging, like, we create that sense of urgency. Not that we're not going to get things done, but it doesn't need to be done within an hour.
yeah,
We can schedule that and prioritize it for tomorrow. So it's like leaning into, how do we create ease so that we are able to
I
show
love
up
that.
in a way that we're not exhausted, and it's okay. It can wait till tomorrow. I mean, we have, at Prosper Beyond, we have some boundaries where we return an email, even if it's I got it within a day. It doesn't need to be within 5 minutes.
Right.
It can
Right.
be within a day.
Yeah. I think understanding and setting those clear expectations and being able to be on the same page with your group about it is so important. Well, Doral, we could talk all day, but thank you so much for taking your time and being with us today. And I just love everything you share. I'm sure we'll talk again and share more with about our journeys together. So
Absolutely, absolutely. You are a dear friend and such a brilliant colleague. And thank you so much for having me on the show. And I hope you have a fabulous rest of your day.
thank you. I appreciate it.